I am Navajo. My grandfather was an elder with the Navajo Nation. The res extends through 3 states, as they say. I lived with my uncle in Arizona, that area of reservation. I worked at one of the places he had in the south, near Flagstaff. I guess the best part of my working for my uncle was the interaction I had with outsiders. Some of the tourists were distasteful idiots, but the good people made it worth it. Probably about the way life goes. The desert is a pretty bleak place, but when it is the only thing you get to know it well, and you begin to fear everything else. When I was in my later teens, I ventured off the res. I looked up a distant cousin, Mai. He lived south of Phoenix, closer to Tucson. He was so happy to see me. I was happy that he was happy. His mother lived in a trailer, and she was not happy to see me. But I did not take it personally because she was not happy to see anyone. It's funny because my cousin was years off the res, but seemed much more dedicated to tradition than me. Maybe because he romanticized it, while I was still feeling the reality of it. But he would use terms that I did not even know. He asked if I would help him with the sin for his mom. Then he explains that she needs a post put in her driveway. I asked him if he loved the res so much that why did he leave? He said it was not his choice, and we got into this whole thing about his dad. The conversation was something that dragged on, so we went on to something else. I asked him about his school. He said it was good. I asked him what they called him. He told me, Mai. I was surprised. He never denied anything about his heritage. He even maintained a tiny little pathetic line of hair on his lip, true to his Navajo name, Coyote, and in human form he looked like a man with a mustache. But Mai was given his name because his mother said he was clever about being born when he wanted to be born, on his own schedule, and always finding a clever means to get what he wanted as a baby. As he got older, his father told him his name suited him because Mai had a power only known to him. A power to get what he wanted by getting you to laugh with him until it was too late to realize what he was up to. That is how we started talking about the old legends and so forth. Really, I expected more, but when I got to their place, I may as well have been back on the res, because Mai was much more into the old ways than me, and they lived in such a skeletal poor place. The only thing to do was go to the nearby gas station and eat slim beef jerky, watch local TV, or hike the desert. Not much of a departure from the res. After 2 days, I was ready to go back. I loved Mai very much, but I was just getting bored. I think I expected a different world, but I just got more of the same. Bored. Boring. Then Mai asked me about our grandfather. I told him, he's as old as the rocks. He responded with, I saw the waiting devil. Oh no, not that, I told him. It is true, cousin, he calmly said. Mai then shared with me how he saw the waiting devil one night. It made me laugh because it was such a story that our grandfather always told with much passion. And now, here was Mai living it out for him. Why? I asked him. Why did you never bust out and go to Phoenix or Tucson? He just ignored me. You know, we don't have a lot to do out here, cousin, he told me. Really, I hadn't noticed, I smarted back to him. I remember the story about the desert here he told us. I remember he warned my mother before he left. He looked at me. He was right, cousin. It's not just a metaphor or a legend. It's real. I walked away from him at the time. We had been sitting in his mom's trailer eating stale pretzels, and I was just tired of it. So I walked down to the gas station and pulled some coins to get a Pepsi and some Lays. By the time I had wandered back, Mai had even gotten out of his chair. The first thing he said to me was, I could show you where it lives. After some heated arguing and awkward apologies, I made myself excited to go trekking with him in a part of the desert rocks there to see this thing our grandfather calls the waiting devil. By the time the sun went down, I was even feeling guilty that I had been so combative with my cousin. He was letting me stay there for free and never asked anything of me. Yeah, I thought, maybe this will be fun. Around 10 p.m. and we had already drank the 6-pack of Budweiser his mother brought home from her job. We were laughing and making fun of our family, trying to find our own way through ignorance on a path of arrogance. About an hour later, we were in the desert under moonlight. We had been walking in the sand, which gets old real fast. Then we end up on flat rock and walk some more. When? I demanded. Soon, he whispered back. It is worth it. Then we are in a valley, and then a crevice, then a cave, and the smell was so overwhelming. Bat shit, I told him. I know that smell very well. I hope he did not bring me out on a moonlit walk to see bats. I can see bats every day of the week back on the res, I grumbled. Then we reach a clearing over a plateau. It was beautiful in the moonlight, even for someone who grew up in the desert. What a view. Then Mai opens his backpack and throws me a beer. Okay, now I feel better, I laughed. We started talking about girls at his school. I told him maybe I would move to Phoenix and go to college there someday on scholarship. I told him maybe I would move to Phoenix and go to college there someday on a scholarship I had heard about. Then he gets all old world on me. I came here, to this place a few years ago, to kill myself. I got drunk, I scored some drugs, I laid down. He stopped. He drank. He waited, and then spoke in a whisper. Then I saw it. Then he looked at me. I saw it. Why? I started. It always has to go underground with you? He said, Look, you see it there? I was half laughing when I looked up to one of the far-away red rocks towering in the night sky, and I saw it. I saw a man-dragon flying in the distance, over the empty desert. I remember, I sat up and I stared. The waiting devil, he said. Then took a drink of beer. I told you, cousin. He was silent. You still think they are all dumb stories? I started asking him all kinds of questions, but I mostly remember wanting to know, how did you know it was here? Yeah, he said casually. I've only seen it now in October, at around this time. As the waiting devil disappeared into the rocks, he explained, it was October when I first saw it, that sad, sad night. And even though I looked for it at other times, I never saw it at any other time. Only that next year, the same month, October. I don't know why. It was unreal to watch that thing our grandfather had always talked about. But there it was, landing on the face of the red rock and crawling into a crack on the side. No one will bother it there, it knows that. This is protected land, cousin. He drank some more, and who would ever believe anything anyone says when they live in a trailer? Or on the res, I agreed. He was right. He was telling us straight, cousin. He stared. The waiting devil lives in the rocks of the desert sunset. Yeah, he was right. I nodded. I moved to Phoenix that next year. Mai and his mother moved to Texas a few months after that. I was never able to find that spot where he took me again, though I tried in vain twice. Maybe some things are best left unable to find forever.
Hi, my name is Dustin, and I have a story I need to get off my chest. It's lived with me for a long time now, festering within myself. I'm haunted by it, which is why I fear blacking out. It all started one Saturday night. My parents were out on a dinner date, and had the place to myself. Lucky for me, I'm an only child, so I don't have to worry about watching or babysitting anyone while my folks are away. Date nights were an every Saturday occurrence, which I believed my parents did to mend a broken marriage. Honestly though, I didn't care. I always felt if they wanted to get a divorce, they should just do it. Eventually, once I graduated from high school, they did get divorced, claiming they didn't want a divorce to distract and affect me from my academics or whatever. This is why they claim to have waited. That's great and all, but I was awake to hear nightly arguments, and I heard about how they truly felt about one another long ago. They couldn't stand one another, and these arguments always made me secretly feel horrible about myself. My parents were miserable and I felt guilty because I felt like I was the reason they were even together, and as such, miserable. I, of course, found out I was right, at least in regards to being the reason they stayed together until I was out of high school. That, however, is beside the point. I lived in a town beside a small lake and was alone in my room watching a horror movie, which was common for my Saturday nights. I was watching Night of the Living Dead. It was playing on my old 90s television set. Nothing fancy like the TVs of today. No, it had one of those big backs and was stupid heavy. I was basically killing time at this point. I was really waiting with my telescope by the window, waiting for my neighbor, Rebecca, to get into her pajamas. She was so oblivious when it came to our window, which was perfect for a young pubescent kid like myself at the time. Before I go any further, I realize now what I was doing was very wrong. Hey, hormones make you do some crazy things sometimes. Hell, I used to steal my dad's porno mags and hide them under my bed for my own use later. At any rate, my clock in my room read 10 o'clock on the dot, and as such, it was time to get into position. I quickly moved from my bed to the chair, peering into the telescope as I did. There she was, the most beautiful woman I could possibly set my eyes on at that moment. Rebecca was in bed, removing her makeup that I never believed she truly needed. I'd always believed she was quite beautiful without any of that. She had long blonde hair, perfect dark eyebrows, her blue eyes were a real showstopper, and her breasts were quite large. I felt like I was in heaven, but at the same time, I didn't feel it was time yet, so I moved back to watching my film for a bit. Suddenly, the lights flickered twice, and then all went dark. I initially jumped at the sudden loss of lights, but I'd been here before and knew what to do, and so I headed for the circuit breaker, which my dad taught me how to work previously. I grabbed my mag light and headed downstairs into the basement. Upon arrival, my flashlight flickered a bit, but I smacked it and fixed. I used to use this flashlight to play tag with my friends, and at one point, I fell hard and got some wicked raspberries on my knees as a result. The light flew out of my hand when this happened, and ever since, it would occasionally flicker when in use. Once I reached the circuit box, I quickly found the switch that I was looking for and flipped it. Nothing. I tried flipping it back and forth a couple more times, but still, nothing. Confused, I went upstairs to see if maybe the neighbor's power had gone out as well. I looked outside. I saw a bunch of my neighbors talking about what I assumed was the power, since I saw a bunch of street lamps out. My neighbors always seemed like kind people, and they'd always wave at me when they looked down my way. But I never dared interact with them. As such, I decided to open my window a bit and eavesdrop on their conversation instead. The conversation confirmed my suspicions, as one of my neighbors said he'd seen the transformer blow. Great, I thought to myself. It'd be forever before they restored power. Looking at the grandfather clock is when I realized what I was missing. I ran upstairs and looked up through my telescope. I could barely make out anything in my neighbor's room, but I noticed the faint outline of her pulling her pajama bottoms up and cursed at myself for missing it all. Since I'd missed out, I decided to walk away from my peeping Tom window and over to the other one to eavesdrop on the neighbors again. A crowd of people had formed outside of my house now. I saw the Robinsons from the 2 doors down, Rebecca's dad, who was my neighbor to the right of me, and Dan, my neighbor to the left. There were a few others outside, but I couldn't tell who they were because they were all wearing hooded jackets. I soon noticed one of the Robinsons pointing towards the woods, and upon following her finger, I noticed a light appeared to litter the edge of the woods. I moved back and took my telescope away from my peeping Tom window before setting up in front of the window towards the woods. Adjusting the focus, I froze when I saw what was in the woods. Standing at the edge of the woods were tall, pitch-black figures with bulbous heads, a bit like barn owls, and their eyes, they were like painted-over globes, all white in appearance. The hands of these creatures were exceptionally large, connected to arms that fell listily to their side. Outside of this, they had no distinct features. These creatures just stood there, swaying back and forth, watching my neighbors. No doubt freaked out by this, Rebecca's dad shouted, "That's it, I'm getting my gun." He then turned towards his house and headed inside. Rebecca's dad was well-known in the area for his temper. He always got angry over little things. I once saw him punt his lawn gnome over the fence just because it fell over when he was walking by it. I always imagined no one messed with him, because it was likely he was the Incredible Hulk and would turn into him when extremely angry. It didn't take long for him to return from his home with the hunting rifle he used on bucks. "Before those mofos sets foot on my lawn, I'm going to blow its goddamn head off, you hear?" At this announcement from Rebecca's dad, the neighbors kept their eyes set on the creatures near the woods. Observing these creatures, I watched as they swayed back and forth before realizing they never once blinked. The creatures would just stare with their glowing eyes, but it was impossible to tell exactly who or what they were looking at, as none of their eyes had pupils. Honestly, couldn't tell you what these things were, but I could definitely tell you they weren't human. Soon enough, one of the creatures began taking long, sluggish strides forward. It was in the street now, walking ever closer to my neighbors when I aimed my telescope at one of the creatures. They were also beginning to move forward. In the same manner, one after another, they seemed to move slowly, almost like the zombies I'd seen in the movie I'd been watching. Rebecca's dad aimed his rifle at one of the creatures before declaring his intent to fire if they moved any closer towards him or his neighbors. The creature he aimed at didn't even flinch, but instead kept progressing closer. Rebecca's dad let out a warning shot into the air. In surprise at the sudden sound, my neighbors and I put our hands over our ears. After a few moments, I looked out the window, no longer needing a telescope to see the creatures moving towards Rebecca's dad. He took a few steps back and aimed his rifle at the creature, who still remained unfazed by his threats. Looking more closely at the creature, I could see it had to be at least 7 feet tall. "I'll wound you," Rebecca's dad yelled before pulling the trigger on his rifle and shooting the creature in the center of its chest. The thing is, though, the creature had no wound and the bullet had passed straight through it. There wasn't even a speck of blood to be seen. The creature took another stride forward, moving only inches from Rebecca's dad, who felt fear and anger as he closed his eyes, firing off another shot. That's when the thing walked right past him, towards their home. His fatherly instincts kicking in, Rebecca's dad went after the beast as it walked right up to his house and opened the door. I soon saw the other creatures moving forward, before hearing a gunshot and Rebecca's screams from next door. I quickly moved my telescope back and looked towards their home. Rebecca had lit candles in her room, and there was a light just enough to see her screaming in horror as she threw objects at the shadowy creature inside the room. A lamp, books, anything Rebecca could grab as he hurled it at the creature, who just stood there as the objects flew through it. The creature soon put its hand around Rebecca's shoulder, at which point she stopped screaming. Her eyes rolled into the back of her head, and her arms fell to her sides. Rebecca became completely still for a moment before walking towards the door with the creature, who I now noticed was looking directly at me. I shuddered. backing away from the telescope before trying to look again, only to realize they'd already walked out the door. I started panicking. It definitely saw me, and I hope I'm not next. Looking back to the street, I saw the other strange creatures entering my neighbors' homes. I also saw Rebecca walking towards the woods with one of the creatures close behind her. Soon enough, more creatures emerged from a neighbor's home, and I saw my neighbors going with them, towards the woods as well, including a little girl from a few doors down. As I watched all my neighbors going with these creatures towards the woods, I hadn't even noticed that one was entering my own home. I heard the downstairs door shut and I froze. Thinking I was next, I quickly began looking for places to hide within my room. As I did, I bumped my dresser and my mag light fell and rolled beneath the bed. I quickly followed it, moving magazines and all socks before huddling up with the flashlight underneath my bed and against the wall. I waited, and soon enough I heard the thing enter my room. Sitting underneath my bed and against the wall didn't give me the best view, but I soon saw pitch black legs step into the center of the room. I tried to focus as my brain kept imagining that the thing was finding me and turning me into a lifeless zombie like Rebecca and my neighbors. I soon saw the creature get down on his knees, making no sound as it looked under the bed. The eyes were bright like two full moons. It glared at me as it reached under the bed and I backed against the wall, praying it couldn't touch me. It continued reaching. Its arm was appearing to grow longer and longer as it did. I watched in silent fear as it tried to fit its head underneath the bed. I closed my eyes, hoping for a miracle as I felt the thing's hands get closer and closer, when the miracle I hoped for came. My flashlight flickered to life, and upon touching the creature, made it jump back, wincing in pain. It opened its mouth as this happened, allowing me to see there was a light within it, much like the eyes themselves. This was followed by a loud foghorn-like noise that came from the creature. I clutched my ears as it reeled back in what I can only guess was pain. The monster's face then cracked as it backed away from my bed. It let out one final yell before running out of my room, and then my home. When I finally felt it safe enough, I crawled out from underneath my bed, flashlight in hand, and looked out the window. The creatures were leading those they'd captured towards the lake. I ran out of the house and past my gawking neighbors who seemed confused as to what to do. I screamed, "They don't like the light," as I ran past them. I quickly made my way through the woods, tripping a few times as I did before making it to the lake, ready to scream at my neighbors about the creature's fear of light when I saw something that made me freeze. The creatures were now walking over the shores of my neighbors into the water, at which point my neighbors were willingly sinking into the water as well. My neighbors continued sinking until all remained were ripples of water from where they had entered, then nothing. Confused and waiting for an hour that seemed like an eternity, the remaining neighbors not taken by the creatures looked confused. A few tried going into the water to see if they could find anything or anyone, but they couldn't find anything. Soon after, my neighbors called the police and they began filing missing people's reports. The unspoken truth of the matter was, even though they were filing reports, we all knew inside we'd never see the missing again. The lake was eventually drained to find the bodies of the missing, but there were no bodies to be found. No sign of anything. This left us all with more questions than answers. Rebecca's father was found on his living room floor unconscious, having a heart attack before slipping into a coma. I still believe this was the creature's doing, and eventually, his family decided to pull the plug on him after they determined he was brain dead. He died exactly 1 year after the disappearance of Rebecca. It's safe to say I no longer live anywhere near a lake. I became obsessed with the idea that the creatures that lived down there would eventually come back for me. Eventually, my parents moved far away from the lake. I had trouble sleeping now because of the nightmares I have about the creatures leading me into the lake, drowning me. I can also still hear the foghorn-like bellow of the creatures inside my head. I doubt I'll ever forget that sound. I consider myself very lucky to be alive today. And I feel if I had not had my flashlight flickering on when it did, I'd very likely be dead today, unable to retell my story. So if you ever live near a lake, be forewarned. They emerge from the woods and they don't like the light. I was 15 years old when I went to my old grandparents' house in the middle of nowhere, Nevada. There was nothing but desert for miles, and I'd heard from an old desert rat that we'll call Jay about Indian folklore and Wendigos. I was amazed by his story of an encounter with one, and the folklore in general. Still, up until the point of the story, I still didn't really believe in such things. Late one night, though, it was pitch black, and I was outside the back of the house looking at the stars. It wasn't long before I heard something shuffling around the garage. I looked back and saw my granddad, but I couldn't shake this really bad feeling. He told me to come find him, but something in his voice wasn't right. Saying nothing, I headed in and asked my grandma why my granddad was in the garage with no lights, at which point she gave me a weird look before going back to washing the dishes. I soon went into my living room, and much to my horror, there was my grandfather, laying on the couch sleeping. I went to bed soon after and was awoken at about 1 in the morning to the sound of footsteps and this awful decaying smell outside my window. It was open because there was no AC in the house. The fact that the only thing separating me from whatever was outside was a thin screen in the window really was not comforting. I tried to chalk it up to my imagination going wild, and maybe being an animal or something. But then, I heard more footsteps, and I could tell whatever it was standing on 2 legs. I thought, okay, maybe a bird, but then I heard more footsteps. The strides it was taking were too heavy and too long to be a bird. But whatever was out there suddenly started running back and forth in front of the house before finally stopping outside my window. Hearing this made my heart sink, and I was overwhelmed by the smell of rotting decay. I finally gathered the strength to look up, and that was a huge mistake. I realized now that I was staring directly at this thing. It was tall, skinny, had patches of dark fur and the head of a deer. The antlers it had looked like that of a deer on one side and the elk on another side. It tried speaking to me and telling me to go outside, but its voice sounded as though it couldn't put any real emotion to its words. I screamed and without thinking grabbed my hunting rifle before blasting through my window. My grandparents naturally came rushing in, and we heard a yell out back. In the 10 seconds it took us to get out back, we all saw him. This thin, unnaturally long-legged thing, and then it was gone. Nothing, and I mean nothing, can move that fast. This incident haunts us to this day, and we never go outside after dark, nor will we ever again. My story is kind of short, but a really strange one. When I was maybe 8 or 9, I had never experienced anything strange or unexplainable. I never believed in ghosts or ghouls or anything like that. But one night, all that had been thrown out the window. One night after me and my mom had gotten back after a long shopping spree, when we got home, I helped unpack the groceries, and then joined my mom for a movie. At around 8:30, my mom told me it was time to hit the hay, and so I did. I sprawled out of my bed, my mom came and tucked me in, and before I knew it, I was asleep. Now this is where things get a tad strange. I had woken up at around 12:30 in the morning. I opened my eyes and examined my room until something came in contact with the trees outside my window. For a while, I just stared at them until I noticed movement. I just stared at what looked like a hairless demon squirrel of some sort slowly and unnaturally crawling down from the top of a tree. I rubbed my eyes, not believing what I was seeing. But when I opened my eyes, what I saw was horrifying. I will now try my best to describe it. It looked like a hairless squirrel with an abnormally large head compared to its body. Its limbs were lanky and distorted with legs that went back just like a bird's. It was skinny to the point where you could see bones, and it was pretty pale and gray. I started hyperventilating as this thing was looking through all of the windows in my apartment complex while positioning itself on a branch. Then, its eyes met mine. But they didn't look like eyes. They looked like empty sockets where the eyes should be. It didn't seem to have a mouth, and 2 slits for a nose. I hid under my covers for about 5 seconds, then looked back and it was gone. I ran to my mom crying and stuttering my words before telling her everything that had happened. But she didn't believe me and chalked it up to just being a bad dream. But I know what I saw. I am now much older and have told my friends about it, and they all somehow believe me. I don't know what I saw that night. Maybe it was just a dream, or maybe it actually was real. Or maybe it's just some kind of misconception or something. I don't know, but I don't want to ever see it again.
I love our gargoyle, Gargzy. He is nothing to fear. I have known about it since I was a kid. The old-timers used to tell stories about him. The reason he is able to exist is because those of us who live here have respect. But occasionally, there is a jackass, some loudmouth knucklehead who thinks the world revolves around him. But our gargoyle settles up with them soon enough, and they are gone. One way or the other. I'm happy to talk about it because, 1, I think it is possible to live in peace among all creatures. And to me, the gargoyle is no different from a rattlesnake, just another animal. And, just like the rattler, step on it and you're in big trouble. But I never heard of the gargoyle hurting innocents. Oh, maybe he puts out a warning, but never hurt anybody as far as I know. And no one will believe me. So what's the harm? If you tell people about this thing, it actually ends up protecting the thing because nobody thinks it's real. And 3, nobody, least way, nowadays is interested in going into the no man's land, part of the Sonoran Desert where our friend lives, and seek him out. Maybe in 1,000 years, but I am sure the gargoyle will still be able to hide somewhere between there and his caves, or do whatever else he needs to in order to deal with it. He has been around a lot longer than us. And to answer your question, yes, I did see the gargoyle, in person. Only one time though, and it was a sight to behold. My wife and me live in the Sonoran, and I always hope to see it show up in our backyard. But the one and only time I ever saw it was on a drive through one of the national reservations in Papago, Arizona. We were going from Tucson to Gila Bend. My friend Benny and I were taking the long way home. We were on 86 between 3 points when Benny had to take a piss. Maybe somewhere around Cells on old Indian Route 15. He gets out to piss, I get out and walk around. And as anybody who knows that area will tell you, if you drive through there at night, the cactus look like people lining the desert. And surely enough, that night was no exception. Then, I see one of the cactus about 50 feet in front of me walking due west. Tremendous pointed wings and ram horns. "Benny," I said. "Hey Ben, look over there." "I'll be goddamned," he said. I whispered to him, "She's a beauty, ain't she?" "A thing of beauty," he said. Benny zipped up. The gargoyle jumped up into the sky and was gone. That's it. The one and only time I ever saw our gargoyle. But I hope it's not the last.
It all started with a camping trip that I had been planning with some friends of mine. We all live in the Central Florida area, and we planned on going north a bit to camp in a free site that we found. Unfortunately, one thing led to another, and I was the only one able to get the time off as it was in December. and becoming more and more difficult to get vacation time. I didn't let this stop me, as I wanted to go camping for years now, and this was the best shot that I had. The plan was to only stay for 2 nights. I would head to the site, set up camp, my friends would join me for the first day, and I would be alone for the rest. When I got to the parking lot, I talked to an older man named Stanley, who was a retired park ranger who had looked after the campsite. He gave me directions to my site and went over a few rules, like no unattended fires, no loud noises after 10 p.m., and to leave the spot as clean as you found it. After I got my tent and table set up, I decided to visit the 2 neighboring campsites. It was about a 10-minute walk to the next site, either way, so it would help me waste some time before my friends got off work and joined me. My neighbors to the west of me were an elderly couple that were packing up just as I arrived. The neighbor to the east of me was a man in his maybe mid-40s. His name was Pete. Pete was an odd-looking fellow who was dressed in an open shirt-sleeved Hawaiian shirt with no undershirt and a massive beard gut hanging out, tattered cargo shorts, and flip-flops. This year our winter was pretty warm, so this didn't really surprise me. After introducing myself, we shared some beers and talked for a few hours. I asked him, "So what brings you to the woods this time of year?" And he replied, "Squatchin'." And I laughed for a bit and noticed he was serious. He said that Sasquatch, or skunk ape as they're called in Florida, live in the area, and he has a few cameras set up here in the heavily wooded areas behind both of our campsites. After talking for a bit more, my friends texted me, so I thanked Pete for the beers and told him good luck to his hunt. After my friends had left for the night, I decided to pack it up at around 10:30 p.m. I snuffed out my fire, entered my tent, and began to drift off to sleep. In a somewhat strange way, the forest almost becomes louder at night as the sound of crickets and owls filled the night. I found it very relaxing and it helped me fall asleep. I was soon awoken in the middle of the night, and it was strangely silent. No crickets, no owls, not even the occasional nightingale, just silence. Then I hear it. It started as a low howl and ended up as a sharp whoop. Now, I have heard coyotes before, and their howl is much too high-pitched for this to be some sort of coyote. My heart started racing. I had never heard anything like this before. After what felt like an hour, but was probably only a few minutes, I hear a loud crack as it sounded like someone took a branch and cracked it over a tree, followed by several loud cracks following it. I heard of Sasquatch using wood knocking to communicate, and this is definitely what it sounded like to me. Has anyone from the North Florida or South Alabama, Georgia area ever heard a similar sound? It sounds like a skunk ape to me, and I bet they definitely live in this area. About a year ago, when I still had my learner's permit, I was 16, so I was a late bloomer when it came to getting my license. I asked my dad to ride to town with me. I wanted to buy some Taco Bell after having plans canceled at the last minute. Because, you know, who doesn't eat their feelings? Anyways, on our way back, it was pitch black out. The lights I had in my car at the time were awful and pretty much just useless, even the brights. Because of this, it was almost impossible to really see anything unless it was at least 2 or so feet in front of the car. The road to my house is way out of town, and the houses are pretty scarce. I was only about a mile from my own house when suddenly, just in view, a small creature clumsily sprinted across the road. I knew I hadn't imagined it, due to my father yelling, "What the heck?" at the sight of it. The creature had the shape of a baby pig, no tail, no ears, and the legs of a fawn. It had no fur and its face shape resembled that of a horse skull. If that makes sense anyways. I was pretty shaken up from witnessing it, but I tried to forget all about it. I didn't think to look up the creature. I tried to look it up online, but I just can't find anything. The closest thing is something from a Cree Wikipedia page, and it's called like a Managishi. They are mostly commonly known in Cree folklore. I don't know much of anything about it though, so if any of you guys are Cree and can help me out, please comment below.
A group of us were trying to cross the border from Mexico to California, but the guy who was taking us said he needed more money. What are you going to do when something like that happens? We are completely at the mercy of the Coyotejes. The Coyoteje that was taking us to California supposedly had a good reputation. He could get you over the border, but also get you in the hands of some friendlies on the other side, and get you set up in a city in Arizona or even California, and also get you set up with where the jobs were. That was why I paid 3,500 American dollars, and the others, I found out, paid similar amounts. It was a lot to pull together. But since this was after 9/11, the Coyoteje was much more involved in telling us things that have changed, and it was much together, and on this night, we had to adjust. We were going over the border in Arizona instead of California. The insurance the Coyoteje took out on each of us was our family. That is, none of us could pay the extra 1,000 he was demanding once we were out in the desert. So, he reminded us the information he had about our families. I didn't really care where we went in, as long it was the Estados Unidos. Me and 3 others were standing in the night desert, while the Coyoteje went to talk to another guy who pulled in a big truck with lots of extra lights mounted on it. We could not hear what they were saying, but we could see them laughing. It felt sinister. His friend drove away. Then the Coyoteje came back and told us, we have to leave now. He was an obnoxious, mean con artist of a man, and I hated him. We started walking forward in the dark. He was back there, behind us, singing and talking shit. The 4 of us began talking to one another. We were wondering how long the walk would be. Then we noticed that we have not heard the asshole in quite a while. We stopped. We called out. He was gone. Just gone. And there we were, stuck in the dark, abandoned in the desert at night, on the Mexican side of the border. We didn't know what to do. This Coyoteje made all these promises and threats, and bragged as long as he was with us. Then he abandoned us in the middle of nowhere? After calling and searching, we decided to band together and take a risk for the border. We walked and walked and walked. One of the guys with us started to cry. I don't blame him. It is hard when you are walking in the dark and have no idea where you are or how far you're going. But we kept walking. I am in the front and something falls right in front of me. The first thing I thought was Border Patrol, and I jumped. Then we all held still. I looked down. I saw something on the ground. The moon was out, so I could see something. I looked at it for a while. Then I approached it. Maybe some others are out here crossing, and I just threw something to get our attention, I thought. I got up closer and could see something written on the thing that had landed in front of me. It was the tattoo from our Coyoteje. It was on his shoulder, and that was his arm I was looking at. There was screaming and panic. The group of us took off running and hid in some bushes by the rocks. It could be a lot of things, and all of them bad. Debt, revenge, drugs, territory. And as we crouched behind the rocky bushes, we saw something skid into the sand near the arm. Then the dust cleared, and we could see it was a giant man with bat wings. It grabbed the arm, made a sound like a screeching bird, and flew off into the sky. None of us made a sound. Then we got up wide-eyed and confused but continued going on the direction we had started. Only now walking faster and always looking up with fear and searching the dim terrain for possible refugees in case they should appear. About an hour later, we ran into another group who were crossing and joined them. We all did make it across. I knew there were many dangerous animals in that desert, so I was really more worried about what may happen to my family if the coyote never showed up or got his money. But no one in my family ever had a problem or heard from anybody. I guess they chalked it up to something else, or maybe thought he stole from them. So it was more on him, the coyote, and his family. As for the crew, I never saw any of them again. We spread out once we got inside Arizona. I never went back to Mexico. I still send money back to my family, and none of my family ever had a problem from anyone. There was so much life and death going on that night. Even the monsters of myth had to take a back seat to other realities. But many times in the years since, I have thought about what I saw, what we saw, and I wonder if the others have ever told anyone about it. Hello. First and foremost, I must relay the need for me to remain totally anonymous. After the recent threats received to my neighbor, I don't want any part to play in this game of theirs. However, I want those out there to know there's more going on than what people are being led to believe. Let me get into a little more. My neighbor, who I'm close with and have known for years, lives about a quarter-mile away. We both have decent-sized property with a lot of acreage and a lot of woods. Recently, my neighbor has been experiencing some weird things on his property, so to speak. Seeing a weird white animal running around his property at night, or something bizarre like that. He wasn't sure what it was. He decided to set up trail cams all over. I helped him out, and I think all in all, we set up about 9. It wasn't even 5 or 6 days later, he decided to check them. A lot of the usual, a mountain lion, a bunch of deer here and there, a couple of coons and some possums. Nothing too out of the ordinary, except when he came across one picture. He showed it to me and said, "What is this thing?" It looked like an all-white human, naked and running on all fours. It had longer arms and claws at the end of it, and it looked like it had teeth like a lion. It looked like something out of someone's nightmare. I told him I've never seen anything like that, and maybe he could share it around to find out what it was. Apparently, the very next day, there were black SUVs all over his property, and men in suits interrogating him and asking him all sorts of questions. They confiscated all of his trail cams, his computer, his SD cards, and other miscellaneous items. They threatened him if he ever talked about it with anyone, they would come back for him and make him disappear. I was able to watch this from afar, as I was near his property at the time. I immediately asked what had happened, and he told me everything I just told you. I don't know what to make of this. He was as white as a ghost and doesn't even know what to do. Who were all the black SUVs, and why were there men in suits around his property and interrogating him? Is it because of this creature he got on his SD card? Something is going on, and I'm gonna do something and investigate myself.
I live in a neighborhood surrounded by thick, dark forest in East Michigan. We often get all kinds of wildlife out here, but something is very off about the woods themselves. The woods are very dark, even for woods, and always get this feeling of eeriness when I go near them. It's like I'm being watched by something. One night, something quite strange happened that I'll remember forever. I was out in the yard and it was getting dark, which I didn't really think much of as I love sitting out at night, watching the stars. That's when I was overcome with an overwhelming fear of being watched. Looking towards the woods, I see what looks like a 7-foot tall, unnaturally skinny person. A feeling of curiosity overwhelmed me and I walked towards the creature at first. That's when the figure turned towards me, but it changed. I was now looking at a buck with huge antlers. I thought I was going crazy and stood there, lost and confused as the deer went into the woods. The thing never took its eyes off me as it did this. A few months go by, and I basically forgot about the incident until one late winter night when I awoke about midnight feeling an intense panic. Looking towards my window, I saw it. A 7-foot tall thin figure. From what little I could see, it seemed like an emaciated human, with the face and muzzle of a deer. It had long, unnatural arms that ended in clawed hands. What was I even looking at? The thing eventually slowly moved away from the window, at which point my fear subsided. The next morning I checked for tracks in the snow, but there were only deer tracks, nothing I could really claim as out of the ordinary.